Welcome everyone. Okay. So first, just a few words about myself and about DataViz. So I began working as a data journalist, and I'm now doing data visualization at DataViz. I'm one of the co-founders of DataViz. And DataViz, we are a small studio specialized in human data interactions and data visualizations. So what we do is we try to address the new users and the information problems that arise from the massive amount of data around us. And for that, we design and we develop some tools, tailor-made tools or applications or interface or different kind of projects that mobilize cognitive levers to help understand complicated data. So for example, spatial representation, visual metaphor, interactivity, and so on. So we are a small team, we are 5 people, but we have a strong expertise in how to make data useful and at the same time meaningful, easy to understand, and sometimes beautiful. So we are working for all type of audience, even for non-technical people, and especially for non-technical people. And we created DataViz 10 years ago in 2010 with my partners. We're based in Paris, in France. So sometimes, to describe our job, I say that we are making the invisible visible because I think it's the most beautiful definition of what we do. It highlights the fact that data visualization is like a tool to augment humans. It helps humans being able to see complex information that they would not be able to see otherwise. It's a technology at the service of the human. And in our work, we are very concerned about putting humans at the heart of this data ecosystem that is more and more important and that is growing. So making the invisible visible. So before talking about making visible the invisible, maybe it's useful to just a small reminder about what we call data visualization, because there are plenty of definitions. What we call data visualization at DataViz, it's the science and the art of visually representing data. So it's the idea that we will try to find another way to describe the same information that is contained in massive data set or in databases or spreadsheets, but visually. So the idea is to translate an information into a language that is made for human instead of a language that is made for computers. It's not something new. So sometimes we think that the visualization is related to computer and things like that, but it's not. You can find data visualization project and examples a long time ago, and the best example is this map from the 19th century. So it has been created by Joseph Minard, and it's a map that describes the Russian campaign, the French-Russian campaign. So it's the Napoleon army, and this visualization, it described how this army left France to go to Russia, and how they come back with a very fewer people, because this visualization is showing in orange the amount of soldiers in the army along the way. So it's drawing the path, the journey from France to Russia. And the thicker the line is, the more soldier there is. And so in orange, it's the travel from Paris to Russia, and in black, it's from Russia to Paris, so the way back. So you can see that it has been really hard for this army, because they started with a big army and they came back, there were almost no one. And so you can find some more information about the temperature at the bottom of the visualization and the different places visited by this army. And the idea of this data visualization, as you say, is to tell the story of this campaign, but without drawing soldiers and drawing guns or things like that. It's drawing with the data, and it's drawing this campaign. And you have in a very in a very simple image, you have the story, but if you focus on the detail, you will find some more information. So this is exactly what data visualization does. It gives you a way to understand a big data set with a story, but you always have all the information if you look for the details. And in comparison, sometimes we compare data visualization and infographics, and very often I'm asked about what's the difference between the two. And the difference for me is an infographics, it's a selection of the most important data. It's a selection of key points or key indicators, key measures that we try to illustrate. So the infographic, there is the journalistic work or the selection work is more important, because the idea is not to give access to the whole data set, but to illustrate the most important points. So there is already a selection of the people who are doing this infographic. So it's very different. Also in an infographics, very often we try to illustrate the concept or the thematic, the subject, whereas it's not really drawing with the data like it is the case in the data visualization project. So in a case, we are really drawing with the data, transforming the data into something visual, and in the other case, for the infographic, it's more about selecting the most important point and illustrating them. So this was just a reminder about what we call data visualization, and maybe to finish, what we call human data interaction at DataViz is just the idea that to make people able to understand very complex data sets, sometimes the visual language is not enough and you have to add some other dimension, like for example, the interactivity, but also sound or also a different sense of your human body that are used to make you able to understand information. That's why we are more and more talking about human data interactions rather than just data visualization only. So let's begin with our main subject, which is making the invisible visible. So first, let's talk about the types of data visualization that make the invisible visible, because it's not necessarily the case of every data visualization. I even think it's a minority of data visualization that are really making the invisible visible. It's really hard to find some projects where the data visualization really shows something that would have remained invisible all the way. Because most part of the time, data visualization is used for communication needs. It's used to make easier to understand something that is already known. So you are not discovering something with the data visualization. So for example, it's the case when you are doing data visualization to educate, to explain a phenomenon or to understand a reality. It's also the case when you use data visualization to raise attention, to spark curiosity, to generate interest, so brand contents. And sometimes, and very often, data visualization is used to support analysis, like for dashboards, to make communicable some results. So those are the most frequent type of data visualization. But for today, we will focus on the types of visualization that really show something that would have remained invisible otherwise. And we can also make a typology of this kind of visualization. We can try to classify them. The first type is the data visualization that show things that we do not usually see, because they are out of our reach or out of our field of perception. For example, I selected this example from the New York Times that has been published in last April about coronavirus aerosol. So this simulation is using data from the Kyoto Institute of Technology to simulate the droplets of someone who is ill. So the idea is to describe, to simulate what happened when someone coughs indoors. So it's very important to explain why keeping your distance is important during this pandemic. And it's interesting in our case because those droplets, you don't see them, and it's difficult to remain cautious about a danger you cannot see, you cannot perceive. So in this case, the data visualization of the result from the Kyoto Institute is very useful to understand better how it works and also to warn people about the danger. Another example about visualizing something you cannot see, it's the blockchain. For example, this is something that is very difficult to understand and to apprehend. So at DataViz, this is a project from the studio. We had the opportunity to work on a visualization of the blockchain and Bitcoin transactions. So we wanted to give materiality to those digital transactions because they do exist and there are real people ordering those transactions, but they are really hard to imagine. Because it's abstract, because it's complex. And so we created this visualization in 3D that show the birth of the blockchain blocks in real time. It's plugged at the one API, which is the blockchain.info API. So this is a project we created at DataViz just to make you able to see something that is invisible most part of the time. So a few takeaways from this first kind of data visualization that make the invisible visible. It's important to give a shape to make something exist. This is something we have really tested very frequently with users. When you give a shape to something, to data, to something that is abstract, at that moment people understand it, but also it does exist for people. When you cannot make a visual image of something, when you cannot give a shape or represent something in your head, it's really difficult to think about this as something real. So this is very important, and visualization, data visualization is important in this case. The most important point is to find the visual metaphor, the right one. Sometimes it's really easy. For example, the droplets in the New York Times case, it's just the same thing. They have draw in 3D drops. But for example, for the blockchain, the name of the blockchain also is an inspiration to find the visual metaphor, but sometimes it's less easy. And the idea is to test the metaphor with your final audience, because something that looks evident for you, that looks obvious for you, it won't be obvious for everyone. And so the best way to validate your visual metaphor is to test it with other people. What you can do from the European Union portal, a data portal. For example, I would like to work on the pollution data. I think it's a very good opportunity to warn people about something that is important, that is dangerous, but you cannot see, or sometimes you can see pollution if you take some photos and you see that it's darker, but the most part of the time in your daily life you don't see pollution, whereas it's something that is dangerous. And maybe it could be interesting to work on this pollution data. Another type of data visualization that make visible the invisible is the data visualization that make visible tendencies that are too tiny or too micro to be visible to the naked eye. So it's the idea that it's going to become visible only when it's aggregated, when it's accumulated. So we have this example, which is a project called Inside Airbnb. It's a project by Murray Cox, and it's a project that makes it possible to explore the statistics collected on all the Airbnb accommodations in several big cities. So the idea here is each small dot is an Airbnb accommodation. It's an Airbnb offer. And you can see the difference between the private room, the entire home, and so on. And the idea is to realize how Airbnb is really used and how it's present in the different part of the city. So it's helpful to answer questions like how many listings are in my neighborhood, where are the listings, how much hosts are making thanks to the tourism, for example. And here you have this overview only because you have aggregated all the information collected on each Airbnb place. Other way, you won't be able to have this picture. Another example is another project from DataViz. It's a project for Michelin. So Michelin, they have a community of connected drivers. All those drivers, they have installed an application, a small device that makes them able to collect data about how they drive. So it's a device installed in the car. And this device sends data about how the drivers are driving, and those data are anonymized and shared with Michelin. And so Michelin has this huge data set about how people are driving using this application. And they wanted to use this data to discover insight about how people are using the roads, which roads are the most dangerous because people brake brutally, or how people are driving on those roads in the morning versus in the evening, or is there some roads where people are better respecting speed limits than the others, and why, and those kind of questions. So we created this platform where you can see all the journeys for a selected period, and with the visual aggregation, because there is some difference in the opacity, with the visual aggregation, you can see the trends because it's lighter when there are more journeys. You can filter by day and filter by speed limit and all the different kind of question you want, and you see the results. So the idea was, for Michelin, the idea was to help cities and local authorities to design better roads and to improve roads traffic. So that's why we built this platform, and it was quite a success because it helps Michelin create some relations with the cities and the city authorities that were very interested about this tool. So some takeaways about this kind of visualization that makes visible by aggregation. Here, important point is the source data, because the more granular the data, the better it will work. If you don't have very granular data, you won't be able to see some trends, and you will rely on other calculation and already calculate trends. So to discover something new here, you really need to have very precise, very micro data sets. And also, when you are working on this kind of project, you really have to imagine that your data set is like a ball of clay and you have to model it. That means that at the beginning of this kind of project, you don't really know what you're going to have at the end, because you don't really know what's going to be the right way to visualize that will make the trends appear. You have to test and to try different way of visualizing the data sets to find the best one that will make the trends appear. Because the data is so granular, there are so many points of data that at the beginning it's really hard to imagine what's going to be the final result, the visual result, just trying to imagine it. So you have to test it with the real data. And so the way we are working on this kind of project is we try a visualization, we test it with the final, the real data set and with final users, and we improve it and we try another one and we test it and until we find the best visualization mode to display these trends. What we can do with your open data, I found this road performance dataset that looks very interesting. So it's a dataset that provides information about road transport performance in a very granular level. So that could be very interesting to investigate the different performance of the different roads across all the Europe, across the type of road and so on. So I found this dataset and I found I should be doing something with that. Another type of data visualization, a third category, it's data visualization that reveals patterns by giving a spatial arrangement, a physical form to the data. So for example, we have this Autodesk project. Here, this project represents the structure of the managerial organization. So it's a graph. That means that each employee here, it's a node, and the links between employees, it's the relation of hierarchy between them. So you can see the pyramidal structure of the organization, it's revealed, and you can see the evolution over time. So each time there is a change in the organization, in the hierarchical organization, there is a change in the graph. And you can see that sometimes there are some reorganization, some change in the organization. You can see it appear very clearly. So here it's positioning in space that makes the trends visible. Another example, which is quite nice, it's a project that has been quite famous. It's called Simulated Dendrochronology of Immigration in the United States from the 19th century to nowadays. And so here it's a metaphor of tree that is used to describe the history of the USA. Let me show you, if I accelerate a bit, how it works. So in trees, there are rings that tell the story of how this tree has been growing. And the idea is the United States, it's the same thing. United States can be envisioned as a tree with shape and growing pattern influenced by the immigration. So here each cell is made out of immigrants. Each dot is 100 immigrants. And so the cells are growing in specific direction according to the geographic origin of the immigrants. And as time passes, the cells are building the decennial rings. And those rings, it's the wave of immigration in even the United States, with the immigrants' origin is different along the time. And so this visualization makes it appear very clearly the history of USA thanks to this visual sedimentation. So here again, information comes from spatialization, and here again we have a very strong visual metaphor. So, few takeaways when you try to make something appear thanks to the visual organization. Something you have to remind is anything related to organic, to nature, is very popular and is always a success when you test it with a real user. People really loves anything related to nature, because I think because it looks familiar. Something that exists in the nature is something that is close to us, and that's why data visualization that try to make something easier to understand with visual metaphor related to nature is always a good point. Also, something that has been studied several times is humans prefer round shapes. When you try to design a visualization, each time you can find a round shape, so something round, it will be more appreciated by the final audience. It's something that has been studied. It's the same idea of that than the nature is everything that looks like round, looks like natural, looks like organic, whereas very sharp shapes looks not natural. So this was for the choice of the visualization modes in the visual metaphor, but something you have to keep in mind too is your visual metaphor, your visualization mode, it needs to be reproducible and scalable with other data, because sometimes it's very easy to find a visual arrangement, a visual organization that looks good with your specific data set. But if your data set is growing, because there are some more data in the next years, or if you change the data set, for example, instead of the immigration in the United States, we want to see the immigration in France or in Europe. Sometimes if you don't have tested before, the visualization is not working anymore with another data set because your spatial organization was it was going great, but only with this data set. So you have to test it for other data set if you want it to be reproducible, scalable, and it's always better if you want to make this visualization evolve in the time. So from your portal, the census data, they are really interesting in any country, and all the more granular they are, the better. And there are always some very interesting stories to tell with census data, so I strongly advise to have a look on those ones. Other category of data visualization, and it's important, it's data visualization that force us to see what we refuse to see otherwise, that force us to become aware of a phenomenon. And for example, this visualization, it's called US Gun Death. It has been created by Periscopic Studio, and it's a very strong piece of art. It shows the accumulation of years of life that has been lost because of firearms in the United States. So it's how many years has been lost because people has been killed with firearms. And it's striking because it puts this reality in front of us in a way like we have never seen before. And so that's why this project forces us to see something that would have remained invisible. At DataViz, we have also worked on something about noise pollution. So it's noise. The project is named Commute. So we record noise during a journey in metro, in the Paris metro network. And the idea is that we wanted to describe noise pollution and to display the impact on health when commuting because of noise pollution. So we have created this visualization. And here, each time the sound we measured is above 80 decibel, we draw a small round, and the color is based on how long you have been exposed to a noise that is above 80 decibel along the day, along your journey. So the more you spend time above 80 decibel, the more it's impactful, the more it's harmful for your health. And so that's why here it's the visualization of a journey from your start to your work, for example, and the noise you have been exposed to. And so we compare the different lines in Paris, in the Parisian underground, so to be able to explain to people which lines are more noisy and more dangerous for your health. And so we shared those results during a festival in Paris, and people were really enthusiastic because they all wanted to see for their specific journey what are the data. And so that's why to make this project more striking and more memorable, we added another dimension, which is data sonification. So let me show you how it works. I don't know if you can hear. I'm not sure actually. Let me try this. Is the sign we recorded in the underground. We translated into a melody depending on the intensity of the noise we picked up and also the pitch. And so this melody, it reflects a subway ride. It's the music of your daily commute. And so here we are shifting the data. We are shifting the object from an unpleasant noise, the noise into the underground, into a melody to stimulate the imagination and also to help public be more aware of this noise that you, at the end, you don't pay attention to this noise around you, but it's harmful. And so transforming it into a melody, it's helpful to be aware. So this was a few examples about data visualization that force you to be aware of something. And few takeaway about that. Data should be the starting point to tell the story, and you have to mix those two different things, data, which is something you cannot change, it's something you have measured or something you find, and the story, you can really create a story from those data. So you have to find the right way to tell the story, the right angle to make people interested about those data. Doing those kind of things, it's a bit the same as in journalism. In journalism, we are speaking about proximity law. It's a law that is very well known by journalists that say that we care more about what's close. For example, your neighbor has an accident, it's more important for you than hundreds of people dying at the other part of the world, the other side of the world. So proximity law, it also applies to those kind of data visualization when you are trying to mobilize people. So something that looks close to you, it's always easier to get interested about that. Also, something that we have to keep in mind while working on those kind of visualization, it's important to speak to intellect as much to the emotion, because it's at the end we want to make people aware of something, and we want people to try to find more information and to be aware of that. We don't just want to that they remind us the emotion. We want them to remind an information, and that's why the visualization we create in this kind of situation, they also have to be very rigorous. They also have to. We don't want to lead to misunderstanding. We don't want to change the data to tell a story that we want to tell. So it's important that also the intellect is convinced and not only the emotion. So that's why the rigor is important, but also it's important to add some captions and to have some to add some tips to help people understand the visualization, and also to give the source of the data set. This is something that is true for any kind of visualization, but if people want to know more, they have to be able to find where the data are coming from. It's important. From the Open Data Portal, maybe there is something important to do with the COVID data. We have seen a lot of data visualization about COVID data, and the visualization has played a very important role during this pandemic to make people aware. But I'm sure there are something more to do, and there are some more projects that can be made, and maybe this is something that can be interesting from the data you have. Just to finish the typology, I'd like to share a fun fact about some data visualization that were not necessarily designed to make visible the invisible, but at the end, that will still do. So we have the Strava case. So Strava, it's an activity tracking application. And a few years ago, they posted a map online, and the idea is the map that was containing the tracks, the recorded tracks of millions of users over the world, anonymized, of course. But the idea for Strava was to share about their community, all those people using Strava and sharing their data about their journey, about their run. And so it was like a brand content for Strava, and they just published anonymized data. But when you are looking at all those data anonymized, you can find some interesting things. And a young passionate about cartography, which is Nathan Rose, he discovered some human activities in sensitive areas in war zone in the Middle East, thanks to this Strava map. So he discovered that some soldiers were using Strava and sharing the data. And we can see their sports routine, we can see their run on the map. And so that was quite a problem, because it gives the specific position of those soldiers in the Middle East and in those war zone. And those position was not, it was confidential. So those traces, they can jeopardize some military operations. So it has been a problem. So take away, just don't do this kind of things. You have to keep in mind that even publishing data, even anonymized, when they're very granular, it can have an impact, and you have to think about the impact of what you publish. This is, of course, obvious. But sometimes you cannot imagine all the impact and those kind of problem. It's interesting to help you remind the impact of what you publish. So what can be learned from this categorization of the data visualization that turned the invisible into visible? What can we learn from all those things? Well, most of these projects are based on a certain type of data. That's the interesting point. There are always a certain type of data behind those projects that make the invisible visible. It's data that are very disaggregated, very atomic. It's data that have been collected at the very finest scale. So we have at the end a very large number of points. And very often those data, it's personal data. It's anonymized data, but it's anonymized personal data. So they can have been voluntarily collected, like Strava or the driver's application for Michelin or any quantified self application. Or it can be the consequence of some online activities like Airbnb or the blockchain visualization. But each time it's personal data that have been anonymized. And so this observation, it's interesting because at the end, our ability to make the invisible visible mostly depends on our ability to visualize very large, very granular data and personal data. And so I'd like to call this kind of data the collective personal data, because it's data that are collected at the individual level, that are anonymized, and that are aggregated to be analyzed together. The idea is to analyze those data together, and that's why we call them collective personal data. And it's an interesting idea that some personal data can have a collective dimension. It's the idea that all together, through the data we collect, we are building our ability to better document the world around us and to better understand it. So it can be seen as a proactive citizen action, something that can be voluntarily assumed. We want to collect data to enrich our collective knowledge. For example, I can share my health data with the Cancer Research Institute, for example, if I want to help this institute in make progress. Or I can share my transit trips with my city transportation authority to help them better manage the network. So at the individual level, it's a very inexpensive gesture, but at the collective level, it helps to reveal things that would otherwise have remained invisible. And so there are plenty of projects with this approach. I will give you just few examples of this kind of citizen project, but you keep in mind that there are a lot. For example, Data Canvas, it's a very interesting initiative. The goal of Data Canvas is to create a do-it-yourself sensor and a network to measure pollution, dust, light, also sound, temperature, humidity. And the idea is to empower citizens to produce their own sensor and to collect data about all those environmental phenomena. So the idea is you can resave your kit and do it yourself, your sensor, and be able to measure the condition around us and share with everyone. So there are already more than 100,000 people engaged in 7 cities in 3 continents in the world. Another kind of another project of this kind is NoiseTube. It's an example dedicated to noise measurement. So NoiseTube, they have created an application on your smartphone that will turn your smartphone into a noise recorder. So you can use NoiseTube when you are walking on the street, for example, or on a park or anywhere, and it will measure noise and it will share this measure anonymized with the community. And the idea is to build a collaborative map of noise measurement to help document how much sounds, how much noise there is around us. So those examples, it seems really promising for me because it helps document the city. And cities, they have become super complex ecosystem during the past years because data are more and more important to manage the cities. It's the purpose of smart cities. smart cities, it's cities that make an optimal use of all the available data to better govern and better manage the resources, because the resources are more and more limited, and the idea is to use data to better manage it. So this, and this is where we can find a common point between the smart cities challenges and the collective personal data we were talking about just before. Because the data the public authorities collect with their public infrastructures, with the public sensors, there are also the data private companies collect when they are operating networks. And now we can add the data that are collected by citizens themselves. And it opens new perspective because it's more data, and thanks to those data shared by citizens, we can move from smart cities to cognitive cities. So cognitive cities, it's not something, it's not a concept I imagine, it's something that has been described in several research articles. And those cognitive cities, it's cities that are learning from the data collected by their citizens. So it's cities that make the most out of those data to capitalize on the experiences of their citizens, to capitalize on past experiences, to improve the governance of the city. So the ideas of those cognitive cities is to be able to better adapt to a complex environment, thanks to those data from the citizens that gives feedback in real time. So smart cities, it was more about improving efficiency, and cognitive cities, it's more about learning from feedback loops to improve the sustainability, to improve the resilience of the city. So to illustrate this concept, I can give you an example that I found quite that struck me. IBM is using cell phone call data to offer new buses routes in Abidjan, in Ivory Coast. So the idea is IBM has been able to suggest new routes, and those new routes, they helped ease the traffic by 10%. Because they used an optimization model based on the cell phone data. So IBM collected data with Orange on 2.5 billion phones record. And thanks to this data, they determine the mobility of Abidjan. They find the recurrent travel patterns, and they suggest an optimization. And so here it's the mobile phone data, so the citizens' data, that offer this ability to better plan and manage services. So here it's interesting because the citizens have a new way to participate to the governance of the city, because now they can act as sensors. They are a source of feedback. And so this is why those collective data we have been describing since the beginning of this webinar are so important. But it also invites us to think a bit, because what will be our role in those cities? Are we just going to provide some raw data to the algorithm to rule the city? It can be a problem if humans are reduced to the role of sensors at the end, and it's not a vision at all. We don't think humans should provide their data only. We think they should also be responsible for the governance of the city, so for the governance of the algorithmic systems that rules the network. Also, they can be responsible for the legal framework and for the supervision of those algorithms. And so there is here a new role to play for humans, which is in collaboration with the algorithm, in collaboration with the data collection system to better rule the city. And so that's why I think we need some new kind of data visualization, because we need some interfaces to interact with those algorithms, to understand how those algorithms are working, and to be able to supervise them. So now we probably need a new kind of data visualization that makes the invisible visible, which will be a visualization that will help us supervise the algorithm. And in our opinion, and it's something we strongly believe in DataViz, this is a next challenge in the data visualization community.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for this inspiring talk and for so many examples of how to visualize the invisible. Let's open the chat for questions. And if you allow me, I have a first question. You were mentioning the feedback loops, and I found very interesting the projects you showed us about citizen engagement and how to use all these collective data to better understand the world around us. What is the feedback you get, or some of the feedback you want to share with us that you get from your users, from your clients, on the projects you've been developing?
Yeah, this is at the moment. Those projects are very interesting because for those projects you need to work on the trust people are giving to systems that collect data. Because for the moment, there is such a huge gap between the general public understanding of what is made with their data and the general distrust about all the systems that are using personal data, and the opportunity to use those data for citizens' goals and to improve the way we are living in our cities and in the world and our understanding. So first, in all this kind of projects, you need to work on the trust. Because if people don't trust you to anonymize the data, if people don't trust you to do something good with this data, they won't give you the opportunity to use it, and they won't give you the feedback. And so those projects are very interesting because you are obliged, you are forced to explain to the final users what you're gonna do with the data. So you are obliged to make it transparent, to make it clear what you're gonna do, and to respect your engagement after that. You cannot do something else with the data. And so it's building a trust relationship between the users, the final users, the general public, and the data systems and the people that will be reusing the data. And this is for the benefit of everyone, because the general understanding of the data and ecosystem is growing if you are working on this kind of project. And the feedback and the insight you can learn from those very interesting data is growing too. Each time people understand better what you're going to do with that. So it's a very interesting relationship to build between the data, the people using data and the final audience.
Thank you very much. So trust is a key component. We all work, our colleagues work in the EU public sector, and we have a question asking what could you recommend us to do in the public sector in order to communicate with citizens with data visualization, and also to promote and build this trust relationship with them?
Yeah. Something that is hard to... it's hard sometimes to find the right equilibrium between publishing data that are perfect without any errors, without any missing points, data that have been checked twice and third time by anyone involved, and just publishing data when it's necessarily and when it can be useful for the society. Something I often see in the public administration is the desire to publish perfect data, to publish data that are really perfectly reliable, because it's the public sector, so the source of trust, and that should be reliable. And this desire to publish very perfectly reliable data, sometimes it prevents those organizations to publish something, because a quest for perfection is a constraint to do things. And so sometimes it's better to publish and to open data that are not perfect, but to explain why, to explain where there can be some mistake, why there can be some mistake, why there are some missing points, but to publish them when it's useful. And this is something, yes, you have to take some decisions here that are difficult to take between, 3 years after it's not necessary to publish the data. But if you publish them too soon, they cannot be reliable. So yeah, it's hard to find the perfect equilibrium here. But I have to say that the COVID data that has been published, it's really different from before. Data has been published very soon. There has been a huge investment for publishing data very regularly without any delay, and it's interesting to see how it has been important during this crisis and how it changed the way we publish open data.
Great. As you were mentioning, it's a process. One of the takeaways was to test and try and test and try.
Exactly.
So don't wait. I take this. Don't wait for perfection and explain why. There's another question. Merci for this superb presentation, Caroline. What disciplines or expertise you need to visualize the invisible? Artists, IT, psychologists?
Yeah. A bit of everything in the team. I think, of course, we need skills in data analysis and in design, in development. Those are the 3 pillars. But at the end, I think what we need more is people with a mix of skill, people that are at the same time able to analyze data and to imagine some artistic metaphors, people that are at the same time able to develop something very complex with massive data set in the browser, and that are also able to anticipate what's going to be the user's reaction and the user's cognitive reaction. And so in the team at DataViz, we have only some mixed profile between developers and designers, between analysts and journalists. And so I think at the end, the most important point is to have people who have the both side of their brain, the right side and the left side.
Right. You were mentioning that this is both an art and a science,
exactly.
Right? Data and the visual metaphor. I really like that. We have a question from Asia. Could you recommend online sources with more unusual charts, which could help us present our data?
So you're looking for online tools to start?
Online sources.
Online sources for Asia, especially.
No, Asia is the name of the colleague asking this question. Sorry. Could you recommend online sources with more unusual charts, which could help us present our data? I don't know, maybe if our colleague could clarify a little bit the question. In the meantime, maybe we move on to the next one. Thank you for presenting this interesting project. Which programming language do you usually use for analyzing the data and creating these visualizations?
Yeah, we are working with the web languages only at DataViz. So JavaScript, everything we are creating is in JavaScript. We use React framework, and we are using different data visualization libraries. It can be D3, but we are using D3 at a very, very low level, because we are drawing upon D3. We can be drawing in Canvas or WebGL for performance reasons, sometimes also in SVG more traditionally. And we have also different 3D tools in WebGL, like 3GS, for example, the library.
Okay, thank you very much. A question from Irina. Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. We are a team working with data, mainly qualitative. How could we select and decide what is good for us? Are there any solutions of data visualization to try easily for inspiration with trial periods, for example?
All right. Yes, you can try something that is called raw graph, like raw, R-A-W, which is good. There are a few others. Let me just, I just find them. Right. If I share my screen, maybe you will be able to see them.
Yes, your screen is still shared, so please.
Yeah, so I need to quit this. This tool is quite good. It's called raw graph. And let me find, I think there is another one. Just give me 1 minute because I know I have this name here.
Okay.
Yes, there is also Flourish that is good.
Flourish.
In my opinion, I'm not using them because at DataViz we are creating our own visualization, directly coding when we need something like that. But I would recommend those two ones, Flourish and raw graph. And also, for anything related to map, Carto is really good. Carto is
great. Thank you very much, Caroline. There is question from Claudio. Trust, concerning trust. Trust is exactly the point of case here in Belgium. Hospitals send data anonymously to an app which measures performance between hospitals for public funding, and this app sends data to Russia where the GRPD is not enforced, where data reconstruction is possible. How to control the whole process chain of data treatment to offer guarantees to citizens and build trust? This is maybe a complex question. But
this is a complex question. It also involves regulation and regulation process. I think it's really the role of each country authority. So here in French we have CNIL, CNEIL, which is the administrative authority who is in charge for making this law, the law about private data to making people enforce this law. And so this, the RGPD regulation has been very important to clarify what's allowed or not. Now this RGPD regulation exists. We need to make it respect, to make people and companies respect this law. And that's the role of public authorities. And I'm less qualified on it. It's less my job to imagine how those authorities can force companies respect the law. But for the moment, we have the legal instrument that has been created, and it's already a huge progress for this part.
Okay, we have time for just one more question, the final one, before we close up this talk. Carlos is asking, what's the average duration of your DataViz projects? How many people are usually involved?
Yeah, usually between 2 to 4 people involved. We are working on small groups. So at least a designer and a developer, and sometimes designer, developer, and someone who will be in charge of user testing and the user need exploration and data analysis. So yeah, 2 to 4 people involved. And the project are lasting about 3 months, between 2 months and 4 months, according to the project.
Great. Thank you very much, Caroline, for this interesting talk. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We will publish the recording on YouTube. And we would just like to announce the next webinars, which will be on the 9th and on the 23rd of April. On the 9th of April, we will have the World Bank talking to us how to visualize the data they have on development. And on the 23rd of April, we will have a webinar on accessibility in data visualization. With this, thank you very much.